So welcome everybody to Sonoma State Social Justice Week 2023. Hello to folks in the room and hello to folks who watch our recording after. We opened today already with land acknowledgement and a few other scheduled speakers and speakers who did actually speak. We had some complications with our initial land back presentation with some flat tires, but hopefully we can have Matthew Williford come and talk about the land back efforts of the Concu folks up in, where are they? I cannot remember, somewhere outside of Oroville. Do you know where the Concu folks are outside of Oroville? No, near Paradise, Oroville. Yes, I'm forgetting the exact place. It's in the slideshow. We could show it after. So he came a long way before he got a flat tire or two flat tires, sadly. So that was our introduction. We also have some slides during the break if you want to check out the bios of the other speakers, a land acknowledgement, and all of that. So thank you for being here. We are in, let's see, we've been going since 2015 with Social Justice Week. It started with student Shelby Wade suggesting it. The sociology department stewarded it. Then the criminal justice department has been stewarding it. And I teach the class. My name is Caitlin Henry. So I also teach in criminal justice, but we have a class where students learn how to do community organizing. And typically it's a student up here introducing our fabulous speakers. And we have we have two repeat speakers from past years. And I'll go ahead and introduce our community-based participatory research with Big Valley Band of Pomo Indian speakers for this session. We have Dr. Sharon Fuller, who's a professor in the Geography, Environment, and Planning Department. We have Alvin Rosa Figueroa, Lily Roberts, who are students here. And I will now read their bios. Dr. Fuller's research and teaching interests include African diaspora, indigeneity, intersectional feminism, ecology, critical race pedagogy, Black geographies, and environmental justice. She has published on indigeneity and self-representation, women in fisheries, gendered indigenous cultural practices, and informal economies and autonomy. Alvin S. Rosa Figueroa is a graduate student in the Cultural Resource Management Program, Department of Anthropology, Sonoma State University. His studies focus on geoarchaeology and indigenous stewardship. Alvin's career spans Mesoamerican and California archaeology, iconography, ethnography, and community-based research. Lily is also a student in the Geography, Environment, and Planning and Anthropology Department. So they're going to speak first. We'll have time for Q&A, and then I'll remind you to fill out the evaluation forms. And we also have Henry Frank in the back, who is an Indigenous artist who has a lot of art on the themes of incarceration, indigeneity, and you can stay for his art show and talk following this. So let's give a round of applause to our speakers.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming out to hear about our project. What we'd like to talk to you about is community-based participatory research and what that actually entails. What we were attempting to do and what we continue to attempt to do is to engage with community members in a reciprocal manner and not in an extractive manner. And in doing so, we partner with these collaborations to determine what the community needs are. It is not something that's hierarchical, that is top down. It is a way that we work with community members rather than work for community members. And so it is very heavily community driven. So this started with identifying the community, identifying what their needs were, and how we might be able to complement the work that they are already doing. And not come into this with the perspective that the university staff and academia are the experts, but figure out a way that we could work collaboratively and hone on each person's, each entity's area of expertise and collaborate. And so we were able to do this with our community partners in Lake County, Big Valley, band of Pomo Indians who were not able to meet with us to join us today, but we work very closely with their Environmental Protection Agency staff, Sarah Ryan, who is the environmental director, and Alicia Castellanos, who is the environmental assistant. And they were very instrumental in designing and identifying what the needs of Big Valley Pomo, Band of Pomo Indians were. And one of the areas that we worked in was really looking at the Russian River Basin and how their cultural practices and traditions might be impacted by the ecological events that we are continually seeing, right? So a lot of times what we have seen over the last couple of years, we've been exposed to fires. We've been exposed to pandemic, and now we have floods. How is that impacting the way that they use the resources in the Russian River Basin? They are based in Clear Lake, which is in Lake County, which is about 75 miles north of here. Now, Clear Lake is the largest natural lake in California. It is the oldest lake, one of the oldest lake in North America. It's almost 3 million years old. There's a lot of history, there's a lot of tradition, and there's a lot of cultural practices that are connected to these water bodies. And what the Big Valley Band of Pomo Indians members mentioned is that they needed to identify and document a lot of the cultural practices that exist in this space. And so was there a way that we could help with documenting those cultural practices? And so one of the things that we were able to get engaged with was to conduct a survey, because they had already conducted a survey about beneficial uses and traditional uses. And so a great way to work with that was to complement the work that they already did, right? And so they work closely, Alvin and Lily work closely with the Environmental Protection Agency staff to look at the documents that they already had to complement the work, to complement that survey, and to develop another survey, which they're going to talk about in more detail of what that process was like, and also talk a little bit about the key findings of that research that they did. But more importantly, they're going to talk about their experience. You know, what is it like to be in a genuine community collaboration? What does that look like? And what does it look like as students of Sonoma State? How does that fit into their academic experiences? And so they will talk about those experiences. And then, as Caitlin mentioned, we'll open it up for questions at the end about that process. So I'm going to turn it over to Alvin and Lily now.
Thank you guys for coming. So let's get started here. So, all right. So in positioning our study with the community-based participatory research aspect, first I just wanted to outline that not all community-based participatory studies are the same, and each offer a unique approach that aims to empower communities by giving them an active role in the design of the research process. The purpose of community-based studies and projects are to understand aspects of the lived experience. And through this engagement with descendant communities, we're able to create problem-solving incorporations of cultural philosophies and interactions with the environment and their journeys through life. It gives us a more holistic perspective of just attempting to help a community. Okay. So the project aims here, engaging the community was essentially with participants to develop a quantifiable insight on environmental impacts affecting access to watersheds, cultural resources, and essentially cultural landscapes or cultural practices where these events were happening. So the annual Tule Boat Festival was selected as the event to target local tribal communities of Lake and Sonoma counties to gain insight on these impacts. The Tule Boat Festival first began in the summer of 2001 as the brainchild of one person, the Big Valley Rancheria tribal elder, Nelson Hopper. The creation and significance of the festival was established to teach the Big Valley Band of Pomo Indians the art of making the traditional Pomo Tule boat and to raise awareness for the protection of the native Tule plant and its habitat. Several Zoom meetings were held to discuss and develop survey questionnaires. As Dr. Fuller has mentioned before, we complemented what was already previously created. And so that gave us a leg into just modifying it slightly with a collaborative vision and seeing how else we could obtain some more information. And so how people at this specific event in Tule boat races would be able to respond to these changes. So the methods that we used were the Qualtrics survey engine. Thankfully, we were given free license to use it through Sonoma State, which is great. So Alicia Castellanos, Lily Roberts, and I co-authored a 14-question environmental cultural survey questionnaire using the Qualtrics. And so in processing the data results for these participants who provided their feedback, I must say that this survey is not wholly representative of the entire community of the Big Valley Rancheria, though it reflects only 36 participants and their perspective on the environmental impacts affecting access to watersheds, cultural resources, and impacts on cultural practices. Participants were verbally explained the project aims and assured confidentiality through anonymity in their responses. Now I'll turn it over here to Lily to go over the key findings. The first two key findings.
So there were many very interesting things that we were able to extract from the survey that we conducted. I will mention Alvin did say that we kept it anonymous, but we did leave it optional to write down tribal affiliation. And most people were very willing to engage in that part of the survey. We also were, actually, I'm going to go ahead and just move to the next slide and talk about the first graph we have here. We did ask some questions about what people used the bodies of water for. And in this one, we were very interested in finding out that the biggest thing that they use the bodies of water for is for swimming and recreating and cooling off. And just like many of us use water for, we go to lakes and rivers and kayak and swim and play. Let's see here. I think we have some fun photos of some folks doing catch and release fishing, some children playing under a mister. This photo was all of these photos were taken at the Tule Boat Festival in August of last year. And if I do remember correctly, it was about 100 degrees that whole weekend. One thing I want to note also is that despite many of the environmental factors that keep people from conducting a lot of the maybe traditional and cultural practices in the area, there was very significant watershed usage for the recreational and cultural practices, and they continue to occur. And one of the things that we understood about that is that they're really learning to adapt to the changing environment, changing regulations, we had learned from conversation with many people that they are using more municipal water supply. If they cannot access a lake due to poor water quality, they are finding ways to use water from other sources as well.
Yeah. So going with the environmental impacts theme, some of the local foods and environments where these foods are grown or maintained or harvested, has become a complicated matter in these recent years due to quickly changing environmental impacts like fires, flooding, or drought. So one of the interesting things that we focused on with Alicia to keep in the survey was looking at local indigenous foodways. What's actually foods that people have been eating within the past 10 years or more traditional foods going back 20 years. And so that was kind of the approach in which we kind of understood that was going to be a vital driver for understanding those interactions with different bodies of water, different types of landscapes. And so the identification of biological and ecological areas used for harvesting flora and fauna, we focused the questions to offer a selection of traditional plants and fish used for original consumption. The questions sought to inform on whether regular consumption of fish, waterfowl, animals, or plants has continued, and which intervals or what season participants consumed and harvested for local sources. Data from respondents consumed of fish, water animals, and plants less than once per month according to their selections. Other information captured were observations to declining species, with about 27 respondents answering yes, that they have seen these changes, and 7 of them responding to no to declining plant and animal species in Lake and Sonoma County. So here we go. Here's what we kind of deduced from our everyday consumption or foods of consumption that were tied to cultural events.
And you can see here that the largest selection was less than once per month of consuming or harvesting any plant, waterfowl, fish, or animal, and ended up being 63% of respondents answering that question. And another thing to note with that is, even if the selection, we didn't offer a selection of not at all or never. So if that was an answer, it would be in that category. So the consumption and harvest has significantly decreased. In this graph, you can see that spring and summertime are definitely the most popular times of the year to harvest and consume fish. And this is what that graph is showing. It's definitely very seasonal.
Environmental impacts affecting cultural resources. Participants were asked to select, again, impacts affecting supplies on native foods and traditional medicines. And so these were specific highlights that have been recent in time to severely impact fishing and the water access, algal blooms, low water, drought, COVID-19. People were at home most of the time and couldn't go anywhere. So with the data, we saw that drought, most participants responded to that selection at 35%, with the leading cause of this decrease of native foods and traditional medical supplies being wildfire. Additionally, algal bloom saw 17%, and COVID-19 at 16%, flooding at 5%, and the other reasons followed as being the factors that create an increase in native food and traditional medical supplies. So here we go. Here's our graph that shows the selection of participants. And so again, it's one of those situations where we were trying to collect or trying to gauge how people were going to be responding. And so it's a accumulation of just people selecting multiple boxes at the same time, because these impacts overlap one another. And that was what we wanted to gauge from this conversation.
We'll also note on that while we were conducting the survey at the Thule Boat Festival, we did leave a lot of questions somewhat open-ended, or giving people the ability to write in answers, or what we had hoped for was for people to converse with us about their answers. And we actually got a lot of really great feedback on that, where people would read a question on the paper and engage in conversation with us about a more elaborate answer, because it's a lot more complicated than just checking the drought box, or saying that harvesting Thule has significantly decreased. And they really wanted to give more reason why. And there was a lot of historical background to that as well. And so we found a lot of success in hearing people's stories, which we did try our best to put into the final report that we wrote as well.
So going off this next slide, the participation to these community events, we saw that there is a slight decrease due to the overlapping of COVID, wildfires, drought, and fire. So we don't often think of drought as affecting cultural resources in a way that Indigenous folks actually do, because in order to hold some of these ceremonies and festivities and things, we Indigenous folks rely on having plants and different types of materials that need to be accessed in order to bring these events to life. And so, and then that on top of fires that make things inaccessible for some people. And so we had several discussions with Lily just on the topic of just mobility also, and having access to certain regions in that way. And so I think it'll speak to this next slide on the, there we go. So these events obviously show a decline in different type of materials and plants to create things such as the Thule, or different types of medicine that people might need from the land itself. So here we have a selection again of just the types of impacts that people are seeing or experiencing that lead to them not having access to these different types of landscapes that have these materials for them. So this will be part of my reflection and just working with the tribe, and then just engaging the community, really, because I think this brought sort of a more natural and fundamental experience that we all need to have, even if we're the highest of scholars with the highest of degrees and honors and everything. And I think this just kind of puts perspective into why I do the work that I do, and the work that's supported by my two colleagues here, which is excellent. And so the resilience aspect, despite environmental factors such as limited access to resources, bodies of water, flooding, wildfires, drought, and COVID pandemic, the Big Valley Pomo community is supported through intertribal connections. Family is helping family. Community is supported through various other tribes from Southern California, from up north, wherever they need to access tules, wherever that's growing on their homelands, people were often willing to share and willing to help intertribally to keep these traditions alive.
Mhm.
And that goes to show that connection that has always been there, regardless of the politics. One must think that these families are intermarried long generations together. And I think the important thing is that no matter what the situation is, they're there to support one another.
Mhm.
Additional support is shown by the Environmental Protection Agency, which this also is super important to have agencies participate in this. Normally, we think of agencies as being disconnected from their actual engagement with communities or indigenous communities. But this specific agency, the Environmental Protection Agency, while at the event, was testing the water on the clock every hour to see the different chemical components of the water, to see if it was safe for people to go in and play with it. And so that was something that was really interesting to see as well. And I thought that also partnering with agencies really helped to make this event possible with different components of just ecology and science and all that. So conducting the survey was instrumental in gathering insight on the environmental impacts and their effects on traditional cultural resources and cultural practices of the Big Valley Band of Pomo Indians and the neighboring tribes in Lake and Sonoma County. Traditional and cultural practices contribute to ecological knowledge, and training of the younger generation is key. In response to the question of do community members utilize bodies waters, participants shared that they're adapting, as Lily said, to different changing environments and conditions to preserve their identity and the cultural practices. And also to continue the legacy of their ancestral narratives and reinvigorate and inspire the new generation to maintain those identities and carry those forward to the future. And with that, pass it over to Lily.
So I have many thoughts about what this meant for me and for the people I was working with. As an undergrad student, I felt very new to this whole experience, and I definitely felt like an outsider, but I don't say that in a negative way, because I was and I am an outsider, but I was humbled to witness the resilience, like Alvin had mentioned, that was definitely a theme of the whole weekend. And of course, being there, this took much longer than a weekend, but being at the Truly Boat Festival, I will note that is where I felt most of these thoughts and was able to witness a lot of this. But witnessing the resiliency and the strength and of the people who have been through hardships, environmental hardships, being a marginalized group of people, I was definitely taken back by their willingness, some people's willingness to engage with Alvin and I and talk about those hardships and express so much hope for the future. And that was really, really good to see. And I want to see that in everyone, no matter what group you're a part of. It's really humbling. And that was something that I definitely took away from that. I also believe that collaboration between non-natives and natives is incredibly important. And I'm so happy that I was a part of this to really understand the depths of that statement, and knowing that that collaboration can really be the bridge between, or the bridge to building a deeper understanding of our roles as stewards of this earth. And as a student of anthropology and environmental studies, I really see the importance of bridging the environment and human relations. And this project definitely opened my eyes to that a lot more and in a much deeper way. And I'm incredibly grateful for this opportunity. It was wonderful. And I'll leave it at that.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, thank
Yeah.
you. And so now we'd like to open it up to questions that you might have about the project or Alvin and Lily's experience with this collaboration, this community-based participatory research.
Anyone have any questions? Yes.
The castle.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, for people
Yeah.
here, I'll just stay here.
Oh, okay. I would like to hear the cattle around the lake and if it is some, how it's affecting the area and
I think we briefly touched on that, but didn't really get into the.
well, not specific, but
Mhm.
you know, I would like to see and the Thule is it's possible to we'll say growing in other areas or
Mm.
just
Mhm.
specifically in the lake or I don't know, I just wonder.
I think traditionally, I believe the Clear Lake did have some semblance of tules growing there, and
Oh, they're still there.
right, and I think there is active restorations for the tule.
Mhm.
And that is something that, obviously, if there's not enough of, we learned that different tribal groups or tribal relatives were bringing their supplies in areas that they know where to forage that and bringing and to assist and make the event happen, because at the end of the day, it's for the kids, for the new generations to learn that these connections mean something and that, that speaks to that, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, another question will be like the pesticides in the area using for agricultural purposes.
Hmm.
Is some agencies working together in that aspect to control that, or I don't know how it's grapes or not. So now I know it's grapes, but over there I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Uh-huh.
I believe there might be some aspect to the Environmental Protection Agency that the Big Valley works with on
Yeah.
that part of the area.
So Big Valley Band of Pomo Indians has their own, I mean, they are a federally recognized tribe. They have their own, this is not a part of the United States Environmental Protection Agency. They are the Environmental Protection Agency. They conduct their own research. They are the experts of those regions. And one of the things that they did point out when we met with them was that they needed the tules are an integral part of their cultural practices. And so Ms. Ryan talked very extensively about a Thule restoration project. And that was another area that we were really interested in trying to find some connections, some collaborations we could have with Sonoma State, is if we could have students partner with them on restoring a lot of the tules around the lake, because the lake has 100 miles of shoreline. It's a huge area. Like I said, it's the largest lake in California. But they've lost a lot of the tules, and the tules are integral to what they do, as what Alvin and Lily were able to observe and collect and document. And so one of the areas that they were interested in is finding ways to continue to restore the vegetation that is central to their cultural practices. Questions about student engagement at all with research or? No. Anyone in, yes.
Do you mind saying it again? You might have answered this, but how many participants did you have in your study?
There were 36 total. And not all 36 answered every question, but 36 were recorded.
Can you talk about maybe the participants that came to the Thule Boat Festival, where they came from and that sort of?
You might know the tribe names better than I do.
I don't have.
Well, just, a sense of, it wasn't just
Yeah.
Big Valley, right?
Right.
Folks came from all.
So yeah, speaking on the intertribal connections,
Yeah.
I was interested in knowing that how, well, not interested in knowing, but impressed at how far people would travel from, especially, given how remote it is up there too. So anyway, speaking on that, the Kauai Band of Indians from Southern California came up, bird singers, people that I've known for years, came up here to offer prayer and song and to bless the event. And so we have these connections. And so it's not necessarily that it was localized, but more so just there's people coming from different areas because of, again, relatives, right? And so it was interesting seeing the dynamic of the local folks who I think about maybe 25 made up of participants made up the survey and responded to the survey, while other groups involved like Kelseyville, it went up to like Mendocino, and people as far as like Canada were kind of involved, people that are just either local now or have just been elsewhere, but they've known about these events and have attended it in past times. So but yeah, to answer your question like that, it definitely was a variation of just different folks that were non-tribal too, also engaging in offering a semblance of what they believe to be environmental impacts and how that's affecting their life too. It's not just tribes, it's the area at large. And so and obviously it was also casual enough to that some people would walk up and give their ideas and speak on whatever it was, and then just kind of walk away and not take a survey. But in those conversations, I think we try to gauge how best to really incorporate their voices in the study as well too. So.
It was a relatively small festival. I say relatively because depends on what kind of festival you're going to. I would say 100 people maximum. There,
About,
correct me if I'm wrong, but lots of children were in attendance, families, elders were there, community organizations that were not necessarily affiliated with the tribe. I think there was a state park representative there with a booth. There were a lot of people with booths offering different services and some health related booths. So yeah, wide diversity of people.
In your last comment, you mentioned how the respondents categorize things as environmental. And I thought it was really interesting that you had COVID in a list of things that seemed more physically environmental. And I'm wondering if you could just expand a little more on that.
Sure. COVID came up as part of the environmental factor because obviously the lockdowns was too real for most folks. And these are folks that engage the land on an everyday basis. And so you tell somebody you can't do something, that's just going to break their heart, and so that's why COVID was there, because it was one of those barriers to leave their home, sometimes unnoticed, or to go out and go to the store, go do a prayer at the lake's edge, or what have you. So those were kind of why we put it in there as an environmental impact. And also a social impact, right? They can't engage community members, they can't engage their elders. They could surely pick up the phone, but that doesn't carry the same meaning as it actually being in person with those other folks. So that's why it was on there.
And one of the key findings that Alvin and Lily found was that the consumption patterns weren't as we assumed. We assumed there was a lot of higher consumption of this species in the lake. But they had found the respondents had found other types of food to consume. And so COVID's going to play into that because supply chain, right? We didn't have access to the same types of food. And this is a rural area. You're not having the same access to the food in those areas because you don't have the same resources, right? There's probably 2 stores in that area. And if they are not getting quality food in those spaces, that's going to affect their ability to eat healthy. So that was a big factor in terms of COVID, the shutdown, how it affects rural areas very differently than urban areas. And so Alvin and Lily were able to talk about those effects about COVID, those effects around the 10-year drought that we had and the lower lake levels, right? So the lake plummeted. This is a body of water that they use. That's going to have a direct impact on consumption patterns too. So that was very important to find sort of the ecological aspects and the links to those cultural practices. And as Lily talked about, there's only so much you can get in a survey, right? But people wanted to talk, they wanted to share their stories. And so we had to be able to capture those stories too. And so that was a really good part of it, is sort of listening and being invited to be a part of that event so that we could hear those stories and then later try to find a way to capture some of the key points that came up in those stories. So they did a great job of documenting those items also.
How do you share them then in your collaborative process? You're sharing with us, but did you present a similar slideshow somewhere? Did you share the stories? What was that process?
This is our first time actually getting together and presenting it. And so I think just our complicated lives and scheduling, really kind of has prevented us. But I think this is something that we probably would want to take on the road and showcase to everybody that this is one of the perspectives of actual community-based research. Like I said, early on, it's a variation. They don't tend to be the same. And so this is the way that functioned for us and the Big Valley Pomo tribe.
And it just happened
Yeah.
last summer. This is the research took place last summer, last July. was it?
July, August.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's pretty recent.
Hell yeah.
I think you have a question right next to you, Caitlin.
Yeah, so would you mind sharing 1 or 2 stories that popped up to you?
Sure. I could go right off the bat. I was kind of sitting at the table eating lunch, and this elder or artist sat next to me, and he saw that I was relatively indigenous, and I told him, like, yeah, I'm indigenous too, man. I'm Maya Pipil. I speak Nawa. I'm a Nawa speaker, and so we got to talking about just our kind of tribal histories together, and so he just communicated that my work and the representation of my work and who I was in this field of academics was important. And so that was a lot of the conversation, really having that representation at the end of the day to carry forth the ideas of the indigenous people too. And not speaking for everybody here, but this is what was communicated. And just having that reassurance of who I was too as an indigenous person was like very powerful. It gave me the confidence to actually be okay. I can engage these folks in a way that it could be helpful. And that's the way I approach my work every day, every time I wake up. It's like, how can I be helpful? And not extracting it, right? As we're so used to hearing in academic that there's no engagement with the community at large. And so having that conversation really kind of focused. This was the conversation that I had before the event happened. So the day before, because the day before they were setting up the tables, they had sandwiches for everybody there that was helping, and different families were organizing it together. So it was neat to have these conversations beforehand. And so having that engagement from this gentleman and other folks there at the same time too was just kind of it made me warm inside. And it just helped me to really conceptualize that what we're doing. I know some people are not going to see it as like
the grand all scheme of like, this is, it's gonna answer all our problems, but I think it's sort of the preliminary process of how we should engage communities in some way.
There was one conversation we had with a person, and when we were discussing, or when they started discussing out loud their thoughts on water use. And they had told us that there was no impact on water use because everyone has pools in their backyard. And that was one thing that where we started realizing these are ways that they're adapting to the fact that maybe they can't access the lake or in certain areas, but they can still play with the water by just putting it in their backyard. So that was one notable story as well.
So these stories weren't necessarily part of the study, only just added commentary to this study. Obviously, there's way more context that we're kind of not disclosing, but it's stuff that we could think of right. But it is one of these things where future research, there could be an ethnographic component to these to capture the lived experience of these individuals individually.
So like outside of research, do you like encourage advocacy of like human development majors and like getting involved, or don't get involved and like leave us to the research? What do you suggest?
Absolutely. Anybody who has the desire to help a tribe in whatever way they can and has to come in a good way. It always has to come in a good way, no matter who you are, man, woman, binary, just, it's just coming in a good way, really. That's it. And then, yeah, I highly encourage students and adults too, just to become participants in local events. Go to the powwows, go to community events, it doesn't necessarily have to be indigenous related, but just see how the communities interact with one another and just bring that into your study, to your worldview. Just engage people in a way that you normally wouldn't, obviously with safety in mind and all that.
California has quite a few indigenous events. So they're open to the public. And there's a lot in Northern California. So one thing to do is sort of tap into that calendar and visit some of the events that happen. They have Indian Days, they have the Thule boat rides Thule boat festivals that they advertise on their website. So there's different events that folks, and the powwows, of course, that you can attend to. And I think one of the things that, even if you think of it from an academic and research perspective, is looking at what expertise that you can bring into that dynamic. And so there's not a blueprint. You bring your strengths. There were certain times that folks gravitated to Alvin, other times they gravitated to Lily. They used that, to gather information, but it didn't have to be this one static way, rigid way of collecting data. It was looking at how the community responded to that process. And also, they went out early. They didn't just come set up and gather data and leave. They stayed there for a few days and sort of interacted with the community. That's very important. That builds trust. And so you want to make yourself a part, as much as a part that the community feels comfortable with you doing. And that's an important aspect too, right? You don't want to kind of push yourself onto the community, but in terms of not just sort of going in sort of this extractive mode and going in and coming out, but being a part of whatever event that might be at that time and engaging in it.
Out of curiosity, real quick, so those that attended the festival, were they people who lived in the general location, or did other people come to see the festival as well, like outside of the community?
Yeah, absolutely. There was a majority of the local folks, but there were relatives that were just in the way too. And yeah, there were a lot of non-indigenous folks there as well too. There's food, games, you name it. People were there to enjoy the time. Like I said, or like Sharon said, there's these things out there. Go on Instagram, they're on social media, and they share these events left and right, you know, so.
Or go to the booth in the back
Booth
right.
after you're
Yeah,
done.
there you go.
All right, let's give our speakers a
Oh,
round of
we have
applause. Oh,
one more
I'm so
question.
sorry. Yay. The booth comes to us.
Hi, just for the people that don't know, can you expand on what it means to come in a good way?
You know, that would be great if you would respond to that. Yeah,
What do you mean when you guys say it?
Coming in a good way, to me, what that means is feeling the respect of the local tribe and understanding those protocols and what it means to be on those lands. And, you know, I've been in places where I've worked with archaeologists and different peoples of that world, and they don't respect the native people or the native thought or the native identity. And it's one of those things that most people tend to forget, you know, that there is a mutual respect that has to be given when you enter and visit these areas. And that's what it means to me specifically.
Well, thank you. Oh, yeah, no, I mean, that's good, for me, like, I'm Pomo and Yurok, but if I go somewhere outside of that, I don't go in with the knowledge that I know, because that's my tribe. I'm gonna go into their land, so I am a guest. And I asked to come, and I asked, is it okay? This is what I want to do. This is what I'm trying to, prove or whatever. Is that okay with you? Traditionally, how should I go about this? What elders should I speak to? Bringing tobacco to honor not only them, but their ancestors that died on those lands, for them to still have it and to have that knowledge. And the reason, we go to the powwows and all that stuff, and we have food, because who do you eat with? When you grow up, you eat with your family. And so as land and community know, every person that shows up there is family. It's the most intimate interaction that you can have with another human being, besides relations, but breaking bread, through any culture is very symbolic about being family. And so, when you're there, just if you don't know, there's no ignorant questions, ask. And, most natives will, do it in a kind way. And, there might be some that would be like, boom, but they'll talk to their family that way too. But it's always, good to just ask if you don't know. And so in a good way, it's about becoming a part of that family. And, I know you can have that exchange of dialogue and with your intentions, but I don't see the trust being built in 2 days. It takes a long time to build up that trust where you can get, I guess, unlocks to what is really hurting that community and what really needs to be done for that community. Because elders just don't give that out because there's been too much mistrust on the information that is
Right.
given. And so, coming in a good way is having an empty heart, a full heart, but like empty intentions. You're just there to be like a chalkboard, and they're going to write on you, and then you're the instrument to hopefully, achieve what needs to be done for that community.
Thank you.
Yeah,
And
thank
that's,
you.
yeah, it definitely speaks to the heart. And then just coming to learn a different way of just understanding life. And absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
I
thank you.
think that's one of the reasons that we try to have a lot of discussions beforehand with the tribe and with Sarah Ryan, who represented the tribe, right? And so we asked a lot of those questions. How do we interact with Big Valley Band of Pomo Indians? And Sarah Ryan and Alicia were instrumental. We wouldn't have been able to be there for the 2 days had it not been for their
Preparation.
leadership, right? And they're bringing us into, and as Alvin said, we still were outsiders. We had no illusions that we were part of the family, but as guests at that table, right? And so the Big Valley Band of Pomo Indians representatives were very gracious and agreeing to have that partnership.
Just like to say thank you. And, I just like to have the definition for, using these terms for people who have no connection whatsoever to it.
Okay.
And I just bring that when I, in the sweat lodges and, people just say stuff and it's like,
What does that
Yeah.
mean, right?
what if somebody takes this information, tries to run their own sweat lodge, not understanding,
Right.
the rest of it, and then they can hurt people.
Yeah,
And so I just try to do my best to make sure, when somebody leaves here and they talk about your panel today, which was great, and you guys are wonderful allies, that they're speaking, facts and
Right.
stuff that are going to help people, So thank you.
thank you.
We appreciate you. Thank you.
I think.
Okay, so our time here is done, but our next speaker are here. We're going to put up the schedule so you can preview why you should stay in this room and build upon these themes with the next couple of sessions. But let's give a thank you to our speakers. And just a reminder that we really appreciate you filling out those forms, the evaluation forms in paper or online. So our next speaker is from the do you say Indian or Indian? Indian Collective, and we'll be talking about building Indigenous power in times of crisis. And then Henry, who you just met, has the gallery show you should visit on the way out and come back in to hear more about his story and his art. So thank you all.